My name was on the schedule. It had been on the schedule every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years. 4 p.m. to close. Section 3. The tables by the window that got cold in winter because the seal on the doorframe had been broken since before I started. I knew those tables the way you know things you've lived with long enough that they stop being things and just become the shape of your days. Which one wobbled? Which regulars sat where? How long it took to get from the service station to the far corner without spilling. I knew my shift. And on a Tuesday in early October, I showed up for it and found Diane already there. She was wiping down table 7 with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had stopped needing to think about it. Apron tied, order pad in her front pocket, the same low ponytail she always wore. She looked up when I pushed through the side door, registered me the way you register something that doesn't require immediate action, and went back to the table. "Diane," I said, "you're not scheduled tonight." "I know," she said. "I am." "I know that too." I stood there holding my jacket, not quite sure what to do with that. Our manager, Phil, was in the back doing inventory. I could hear the clipboard against the metal shelving. I looked at the schedule on the wall. My name was there, same as always, but next to it, in different handwriting, Diane's, I recognized the slant of it, was a small notation I hadn't seen before. One word. Covered. "Phil knows?" I asked. "Phil approved it," she said, and moved to the next table. That was the first time. The second time was 2 weeks later, a Thursday. I came in and found her already on the floor. Same section, same efficiency, same ponytail. I asked her why. She straightened up and looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't read. Not unkind, not dismissive, just settled. The expression of someone who had already made a decision and wasn't interested in relitigating it. And she said, "You'll understand later." Then she picked up her order pad and walked toward the kitchen. The third time, I almost didn't notice. That's the part I keep coming back to. I almost didn't notice. I walked in, saw her there, felt a small flicker of something I didn't examine too closely. Relief, maybe, or the guilty cousin of relief. And I almost just turned around and went home. It had been a hard week. I had things going on. The covered shift felt like something the universe had handed me, and I nearly just took it without asking why. I didn't leave. Something made me stay and ask. But I want to be honest that I almost didn't. By the end of October, Diane had covered 6 of my shifts. 6. I counted later when it mattered to count. At the time, I hadn't been keeping track. If you've ever had someone do something for you that you didn't fully see until it was almost too late to thank them for it, stay with me. This story goes somewhere I didn't expect, and I think you'll want to be there when it does. Hit like if any of this already sounds familiar, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and tell me in the comments, 1, if you'd have asked sooner, 2, if you'd have done what I almost did and just taken the luck without looking at it. I want to know. Now let me tell you what I was actually doing during those 6 shifts. The first one? I went home and slept for 4 hours in the middle of the afternoon. The deep, unconscious kind of sleep that happens when your body finally stops waiting for you to give it permission. I hadn't slept like that in months. The second, I met a friend for dinner, ordered too much food, split a bottle of wine, and spent most of the evening complaining about things at work that felt urgent at the time and that I cannot now recall. The third, I sat in my car in a parking lot for an hour and 15 minutes on the phone with my landlord about a lease renewal, stressed and distracted and eating cold French fries from a drive-through bag on my passenger seat, going nowhere. None of it was important. Not a single hour of it was something that couldn't have waited or been rescheduled or simply not happened at all. And while I was doing all of that, the sleeping, the wine, the parking lot, Diane was at the restaurant, on her feet, running my section, carrying plates from the kitchen to the tables by the cold window, making small talk with the regulars whose names I knew and she didn't. Going home afterward to whatever her evening was, in whatever her life looked like outside of those walls, which I realized around the fourth shift that I knew essentially nothing about. I started paying attention to her after the third time. Not from guilt exactly, though the guilt was there, low grade and persistent, but because something about the pattern refused to sit still in the back of my mind. People covered shifts. That was normal. It was part of how the place ran. You gave someone a Saturday, and they owed you a Sunday, and over time it balanced out. But Diane hadn't asked me for anything. Not once, not in passing, not even the casual mention of a future favor that would have made the whole thing feel like a transaction I could understand. She just kept showing up on my shifts, saying, "You'll understand later," and going back to work. So I started watching. She brought her lunch from home every day. Same container, blue plastic, slightly warped on one side from too many trips through the dishwasher. Whatever was inside, she ate it standing at the prep counter in about 8 minutes flat before the dinner rush started, efficiently and without ceremony. She never touched the coffee machine in the break room. She refilled a thermos she brought from home, the same thermos every day, dark green with a small dent near the base, like it had been dropped once and kept anyway. Her car was in the back lot, a gray Honda sedan, maybe 15 years old, maintained carefully but at the outer edge of what careful maintenance could do. There was a crack running diagonally across the lower third of the windshield. I had been seeing that crack for 8 months. It had not been fixed. Her shoes were the standard non-slip kind we all wore, black, low, the kind that the restaurant supply place sold in bulk. But hers had been resold. I only noticed because the rubber at the heel was a slightly different shade than the rest of the shoe, newer material on older leather. Someone had taken them to a cobbler instead of buying a new pair. None of this was dramatic. I want to be clear about that. None of it was the kind of detail that would stop you in your tracks if you saw it in isolation. It was only when I put it together, the thermos, the container, the windshield, the shoes, and 6 covered shifts with nothing asked for in return, that it started to feel like something I should have been paying attention to for a long time. I asked Marcus about it. Marcus had worked at the restaurant for 11 years, which made him the unofficial institutional memory of the place, the keeper of all the things that had happened before anyone else arrived, delivered in the particular tone of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything. "Diane does that sometimes," he said, not looking up from the silverware he was rolling. "Don't overthink it." "Does she do it for everyone, or specifically for me?" He paused. Small pause, barely noticeable. "Don't overthink it," he said again. But when he finally glanced up, his eyes said something that his mouth had decided not to. I went home that night and sat with that look for a long time. If you've ever been the last person in a room to understand something that everyone around you had quietly agreed not to say out loud, leave me a comment. Just tell me you've been there. Because I kept going back over that month in my head, shift by shift, trying to find what I'd been missing. And the more carefully I looked, the worse the feeling got. Not because something terrible had happened, because something had been happening all along, and I had been completely, entirely somewhere else. I asked her directly on a Wednesday, not on the floor, not in the middle of a rush. I waited until we were both in the break room at the same time, which didn't happen often because we ran on different rhythms. And I sat down across from her at the small table by the lockers, and I said, without preamble, "Diane, why are you covering my shifts?" Not quite a question, more like a statement I was placing on the table between us, waiting to see what she did with it. She looked at her thermos, turned it once in her hands, That small rotation, both palms, the gesture of someone deciding how much of something they're willing to give. The refrigerator behind me hummed. The sounds of the kitchen came through the wall, muffled and familiar. "You needed the time," she said. "For what? I wasn't doing anything with it." "That's not always the point of time," she said. "Diane," I leaned forward slightly, "that doesn't make sense." She was quiet. And then she said something I don't think she meant to say. I think it came out the way things come out when someone has been careful for a long time and gets tired just for one moment of being careful. She said, "Your mother called, honey." The break room went very still. Or maybe I went very still and the break room stayed exactly the same. The refrigerator was still humming. Someone was running water in the kitchen. Everything around me continued to be precisely what it had been 10 seconds before, and I was sitting at a table in a restaurant break room hearing a sentence that had just rearranged everything. "When?" I said. 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks ago was the first covered shift. I had done the math before she finished the sentence. She told me what happened. My mother had called the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon and asked to speak to whoever handled the schedule. Phil had transferred her to Diane by accident. He'd been distracted, mid-inventory, hadn't caught the name before he put the call through, and instead of transferring her again, Diane had listened. My mother had talked for about 10 minutes. She said her daughter worked there. She said she'd overheard a phone call, that her daughter had sounded very low lately, that she'd heard her say she was thinking about quitting. She was worried. She didn't want her daughter to know she'd called. She wasn't asking for anything specific. She just wanted someone there to know, in case there was anything small that could be done. Diane had said, "I'll keep an eye out." The first covered shift had been impulsive. She'd seen me come in that Tuesday looking like someone running on the last reserves of something, and she'd told Phil she'd take my section, and she had. The second time had felt right again. By the third, it was a decision. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "You could have just said something." "Because your mother asked me not to," she said. "And because you wouldn't have accepted it if you'd known it was help. You'd have said you were fine." I opened my mouth. I closed it again. She was entirely correct. "How did you know she was sick?" I asked. "That's not the same thing as being stressed. You said she called because I was stressed." Diane looked at her thermos. "She called a second time," she said, "about 3 weeks after the first. She said she wanted to know how you were doing." A pause, short and weighted. "She sounded different the second time, tired in a specific way. I've heard that kind of tired before." I drove home that night and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, in that particular voice she used when she was pretending everything was easy, warm, quick, slightly too bright. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked about work, about my apartment, about whether I'd been cooking or just getting takeout again. Her questions. The ones she'd been asking me since I moved out at 22. The same questions in the same order, the ritual of them. Near the end I said, "Mom, are you okay?" There was a pause. Not long. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But my mother had never paused at that question, not in my entire adult life. She always answered immediately, "Fine, I'm fine, why are you asking?" Or she pivoted to something else. Or she laughed and said, "You worry too much." Some version of deflection, easy and practiced. This time she paused. "I'm okay," she said. "I just miss you." I told her I'd come visit soon. I meant it. I had no idea yet how soon would need to mean. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something honestly, because I've thought about this more than I can fully explain. If someone who loved you was trying to protect you from a hard truth, giving you time without telling you why, managing what you knew and when you knew it. Would you want them to tell you straight? Or would you want the time, even without knowing you needed it? I still don't have a clean answer. Tell me yours in the comments. I genuinely want to know how other people think about this. I went back to work the next morning and found the schedule folder in Phil's cabinet. He kept them for payroll, a month back at a time, and I pulled out the one from 6 weeks before. My mother's phone call and the first covered shift. Same week, same Tuesday. The dates matched exactly. I came back the next shift and asked Diane to tell me everything, all of it, from the beginning. We stood in the parking lot before opening, her with her thermos, me with coffee I'd bought on the drive over because I'd needed something to hold. The morning was cold. Neither of us was in a hurry to go inside. She told me about her daughter. 8 years ago, her daughter had been in a situation not entirely unlike mine. Working too hard, running too low. The kind of person who didn't ask for help because she'd been raised to handle things and had gotten good enough at it that no one thought to offer. Someone at her daughter's workplace had noticed, had covered a few shifts, quietly, without making it into something. Her daughter had never known while it was happening. She'd found out later, after the fact, when things had stabilized and she could look back and see the space that had been made for her. Diane had sworn, after her daughter told her that story, that she would do the same thing when she had the chance, that she would pay it forward to whoever seemed to need it, when she could, without making it into a transaction or a performance. "How many times have you done this?" I asked. She thought about it. "You're the fourth," she said. "Over about 12 years. Does anyone know?" "Not while it's happening," she said. "That's the point." I called my mother that evening. Really called her. Not the 20-minute ritual, not the questions and the deflections, but an actual conversation. The kind where I asked things I'd been not asking for months and waited for the real answers. She'd been having tests. She'd been waiting for results. She hadn't told me because she hadn't wanted to worry me before she knew something definite. And then she'd known something definite and hadn't wanted to tell me over the phone. And then more time had passed, and the telling had gotten harder the longer she'd waited. She had known for 3 weeks. I sat on my kitchen floor after we hung up. I don't know why the floor, I just sort of ended up there. And I thought about 6 Tuesdays and 6 Thursdays, and a woman I'd barely known who had been handed 10 minutes on the phone with my mother and had decided, from those 10 minutes alone, that it was enough of a reason. 31 days. My mother had bought me 31 days without telling me she was buying them. I had used exactly none of them on her. The diagnosis came on a Friday. My mother called me herself, which I understood later was deliberate. She'd wanted to be the one, in her own voice, before it became a piece of information that other people knew and discussed and processed on her behalf. She'd been waiting for the final results. She'd been waiting and not telling me she was waiting. And when they came, she picked up the phone the same way she always had, middle of the afternoon, just to talk. Except this time, it was different. I won't go into the details. That part belongs to her, not to this story. What I'll say is that it was serious enough that the word later stopped being vague and started being specific. We had time, not unlimited time, the kind of time that you have to decide, consciously and deliberately, to use. I took leave from the restaurant the same week. On my last shift before I left, Diane and I worked the floor together for 4 hours without talking much. It was a Friday, busy, the kind of night where conversation happened in fragments between tables and then got lost. Near the end of the shift, in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the service station, she pressed a small white envelope into my hand, my name on the front. Her handwriting. The same slant I recognized from the schedule. I opened it in the parking lot after close, sitting in my car with the engine off. A plain card inside, cream-colored, no design. One line written in the center in blue pen. Your mother asked me to make sure you had time. I hope you used some of it well. I sat there for a long time. I found out the rest from Marcus over the following weeks, in the careful way he gave out information he'd been holding, a piece at a time, like he was checking each one before he handed it over. Diane had done this for 3 people before me. He thought he knew who they were, though she'd never confirmed it. She'd never told anyone what she was doing, never mentioned it, never allowed it to become something she was known for. And she had never, in 12 years, asked for anything back. He told me about her own mother last. Diane's mother had died on a Tuesday. Diane had been working a double that week, had been trying to get coverage for 2 weeks. Nobody could take the shifts. She'd been at the restaurant when the call came, still in her apron, standing by the service station at the end of a shift, not yet home. She had sworn after that. She'd made herself a promise about what she would do if she ever had the chance to give someone else what no one had been able to give her. She'd had the chance 4 times. I went to Phil the next morning and asked for the old schedule. He handed it over without much comment. I found the copy from October, my name, and next to it, in Diane's handwriting, that one word: covered. I asked if I could keep it. He looked at me like I was slightly unusual. "It's just paper," he said. "I know," I told him. "Not to me." Most of this is true. Some details have been shaped for the telling: names, the order of certain conversations, a few small specifics that didn't change the shape of what happened, but made it easier to tell cleanly. An AI helped me find the language for the parts I didn't know how to say on my own. But the card exists. The schedule exists. They're both in my kitchen right now, on the counter where I see them every morning before I do anything else. My mother is still here. That is the part I am most grateful to be able to say. I went back to work in the spring. My mother had a harder winter than we'd hoped for, and a better spring than the doctors had predicted, which is the kind of sentence I used to think only existed in other people's stories until it became mine. She tires more easily now. She moves more slowly. But she still calls me on Tuesday afternoons, in the middle of the day, just to talk. And I answer every single time, regardless of what I'm doing, and I stay on the line for as long as she wants, and I never think about the other thing I was supposed to be doing. That's the change. That small, ordinary, unremarkable change. That's what 31 days bought, once I finally understood what they were for. Diane is still at the restaurant. Same station, same thermos, same ponytail. The crack in her windshield got fixed sometime in November. I don't know exactly when. It was just gone one day when I looked. Her shoes are new. I noticed and didn't say anything about it. Some things you observe without making them into a moment. We don't talk about what she did. We don't mark it when we're on the floor together. Don't return to it. Don't make it the center of anything. But sometimes, near the end of a shift, she'll look at me with that settled expression. The decided one, the one I couldn't read in October. And I understand now what it contains. It means, I saw something. I acted on what I saw. It cost me nothing I wasn't willing to give, and I would do it again. I think about the person who covered for Diane's daughter 8 years ago. That person went home and probably didn't think much of it. Just a shift, just a small thing on an ordinary week. They couldn't have known what they set in motion, that the woman whose daughter they'd helped would spend the next decade quietly paying it forward to strangers in break rooms and parking lots and schedule folders, one covered shift at a time, never asking for anything, never telling anyone. That's what I keep coming back to. What people do when no one is watching doesn't stay contained to the moment. It moves, it travels through people and years and Tuesday afternoons in ways that no one can track or predict or take credit for. It keeps moving long after the person who started it has gone home and taken off their apron and stopped thinking about it. I have the card on my kitchen counter. I have the schedule folded beside it. Some mornings I read them before I do anything else. Not as a reminder to be grateful, though I am, more than I know how to say, but as a reminder that somewhere, right now, someone is probably doing something for you that you don't know about yet. Something quiet. Something that is costing them an evening, or a Tuesday, or 31 days. And they're not telling you, because they understand that some things only work as gifts if you don't see them coming. You'll understand later. She was right. Later was the only time I could have really heard it. To everyone who stayed with me all the way through this, thank you feels small for what you just gave me, which is your time and your attention and whatever this story stirred up in you along the way. If it found you at a moment when you needed it, I hope you'll pass it on to someone else who might. Subscribe if you want to stay, like if this one landed, and leave me a name in the comments, just a name, of someone who quietly carried something for you once, without asking for anything back. They deserve to be remembered somewhere, even here, even like this. I'll read every one.